All right, good evening. So today we're going to be talking about the imperfect indicative, which is going to be our first past tense verb. With English is a little bit different because English has one simple defined past tense verb. We tend to talk in just the simple past tense. So I ate is the simple past tense. Ate is the past tense from eat. So this is a simple defined action. It's completed. I ate. And we can also introduce the continuous action. I was eating. And this is where we're going to include the to be verb was. It is going to be past tense with the participle eating, with that ing. So I was eating food tells you that it's a bit of a continuous action. So let me kind of write this out here real quick. So we could say the past tense kind of functions like this, where I ate is just a simple moment in time, has really no connotations further. The continuous would be more like it happened in the past, but it continued into the future or into the distant past in this case here. So this is the difference between I ate and I was eating. The good news is that Greek is going to function similar like this, where it's going to have a simple defined past tense, which is going to be I ate. It's called the aorist tense. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And the imperfect tense, which has that past tense continuous aspect. The reason why it's called the imperfect is because there's an undefined completion to it. It possibly kept going. The imperfect tense is going to be the tense of choice when working through narrative. You'll find a lot more imperfects in your narrative tenses. Jesus was walking by the shore. Jesus was walking with his disciples. Jesus was teaching his disciples. You'll find that very common in the narrative messages, just because it has that continuous action, which is a little bit more versatile than just that simple Jesus did this, Jesus did that. And it makes the story flow a little bit nicer, a little less choppy with that continuous action. So we already have learned the word agapao. So let me just write that out for you here. Agapao is the lexical form when we're looking in the scriptures. Anything what we'll find with all contracted verbs is that this contract here at the end of the root disappears. We just find agapo. So agapo means I love, and this is the present tense. Agapo is I love. Well, with the imperfect tense, we're going to find something a little bit interesting happening to the imperfect tense, and it's going to be the case with all past tenses in Greek. So all past tense verbs will either have an augment or a reduplication. I'll just write redup for short. So the augment is going to be an epsilon that connects to the present tense stem. Or, the imperfect is going to have the epsilon connect to the present tense stem. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And a reduplication is just simply, so if we had a root begin with a lambda, we would find that the reduplication would be a lambda here with an epsilon. And so if it starts with a theta, we would find an epsilon here, but we'd also find a tau. So the reduplication is reduplicating the first consonant in the root of the word. We're going to learn about this later in the perfects, so I don't want to stress this too much. But the augment here is going to be added to the stem. Next week we're going to talk about how the aorist tense does not have the present tense, so we'll worry about that later. But the imperfect tense takes the present tense stem. So for luo, our fun little word, or even up here agapao, we have an augment attaching itself to the beginning of the root of the word. So here we have epsilon plus, so we're just going to go og right down here, og plus root. So agapo, we'll just make it short here. So the epsilon plus the alpha here, what happens when we have these two combined?
They become an eta.
They become an eta. They become an eta, exactly. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to write agapone. So this is actually agapone, so that omega is going to stay there. Because technically what's happening is we have the alpha plus the personal ending omega, they contract, and they become an omega. So agapone.
So you automatically get the movable nu?
No. This is part of the personal ending, the nu here. This is not a movable nu. But good eye with that. So agapone went from I love to I was loving. We could even do the aorist if we wanted, which would be the epsilon, which is the augment, plus the root, agapa, which becomes, again, we see the epsilon and the alpha here contracting to an eta. This is what we're going to find here. And then we have the tense formative sa. We don't know that yet. And then this becomes agapasa, which is I loved. So there's a big difference between the aorist tense, I loved, and the imperfect tense, I was loving.
So is this one of those instances where the sigma can still stand between two vowels?
This is a tense formative and not personal endings.
Okay.
But yes, this is one of the instances in which the sigma can stand between two vowels. So the key thing to note about the imperfect tense is that it takes the present tense stem. So luo, this is a great one. So luo is our present tense. Again, we have our present tense stem here, lu. As we saw last week, that lu is one of the words that its root does not change regardless of stem. So we have epsilon, because this is the augment. The augment is always going to be the first thing that comes, plus the present tense stem lu, plus the connecting vowel omicron. So I'll just write CV here for you, plus the personal ending nu. So all this together, we get eluon. What we saw with agapao is that we had the vowel alpha. Here we have a consonant lambda. So when you have a consonant in the beginning of your root, it's just going to attach to the root. When it is a vowel, it's going to most likely lengthen to an eta. That's just one of the rules it is. So you'll find a lot of etas in the imperfect or in the aorist tense. And so the key kind of to recognizing past tense, whether it's aorist, whether it's imperfect, whether it's perfect tense, is either the reduplication or the augment. Those are going to be your key indicators that it's a past tense. One real quick thing is that the indicative verbs are the only verbs that will have the augment. Mm. So you could have a aorist active subjunctive, first person singular, but you would not have an augment on the stem. Mm. That'll be key to note later. So the augment is going to be the key to identifying the past tense in the indicative mood. Before I get any further, a couple weeks ago we talked about the master personal ending chart. So let me just kind of draw that out for you here. So on one hand, we have the primary endings, which is right, primary personal endings. And then we have active. And then we have passive as well. So I'll just draw that line there, or middle passive, sorry. So we have, in the first person singular, we have no personal ending. Then we have sigma. Then we have iota. Then we have men. Then we have te. And then we have nsi. And these are the personal endings, and these are going to be telling you person in the verbs. And then for the middle passive, we have my, sai, tai, metha, stha, and intai. I'll just draw parentheses around these. So we learned these quite a while ago. And these are going to be the indication as kind of how to quickly identify what person it is. And if you memorize these, you can quickly memorize person. Today we're going to learn the second half of this chart. And so this is going to be, on this side, is going to be the secondary personal ending. So all persons in verbs will fall under one of these four categories. If it falls under the primary personal ending, it will either be active or middle passive. If it falls under the secondary personal ending, it will either be active or middle or passive. So it's going to fall under one of these charts. And so you can quickly identify what person it is just by knowing these charts. In the secondary, active, we have a new as the personal ending here. Then we have a sigma, and then nothing. So this is kind of, we could kind of look at this and see that this is reversed from this in some ways. There's some variations there, but kind of the same. And then we're going to see min, so that's identical. And then we're going to see te, which is identical. And then we're going to have a new down here. So the personal ending here and here are going to be the same. And then down here, we're going to have main, and then we're going to have, upsilon, and then we're going to have a ta. And we're going to have metha, stha, and then we'll end with an anta. So these are the personal endings here. The nice thing with these is that we're going to have the same, the kind of same personal endings. We're going to find some similarities here between all tenses and all personal endings. So let me just write this out for you here. So this is going to be the paradigm. So we have eluan, elus, eluen, and then we have eluomen, eluete, and then eluon. You usually help if I can spell it correctly. And then here we have eluomen, elu, u, elu, ete, or sorry, eto, eluametha, elu, estha, eluanta. This is the paradigm here, and we can break it down here real quickly. So we have this the stem here, lu. We can see the stem lu is unchanged all across the board, right? We see lu, 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 lu all down the board. Then we have the augment here attaching itself to the stem all down the board, so that identifies past tense. Here we find the connecting vowel, so we still have connecting vowels in the imperfect. Omicron, epsilon, epsilon, omicron, epsilon, omicron. So we see that it's all the same down the road. So we have connecting vowels in the imperfect, and then it attaches itself to the personal endings. The nice thing here is that we can see metha is the same in the middle passive, in the secondary and in the primary. Same with estha. We have sigma, theta, epsilon as our personal endings in both the middle passive. So that's going to be the same. There are some similarities. There are some vast differences. Make sure that you are comfortable with them. One thing I do want to say is that eluon here can be either first person singular or third person plural. How will we know the difference between these two? Context. Context will tell you whether this is I was loosing versus I or they were loosing. So the key to the important thing about the imperfect is that you're going to add a to be verb was or were with the participle. So luo in the imperfect is going to get an augment. It's going to have its connecting vowel and then the new. So eluon, I was or they were. The to be verb will have different inflections based on person. I was loosing versus they were loosing, or destroying, however, whatever the context is going to tell you how to gloss that. I was loosing or they were loosing. And so the important thing here is to know that in the imperfect, we're going to be translating it with the to be verb was or were with a participle of that gloss of that word. But this is more or less the kind of one of the primary charts that we're going to have to learn. And to understand it, or when we understand it, we can understand the verbs kind of as a whole. So again, the advantage to this chart is you can see the personal endings and you can quickly identify which category it falls under, and then you can kind of do a little bit of legwork to figure out the tense. So know this chart so you can quickly understand the difference between the primary active or primary middle passive versus the secondary active or the secondary middle passive. So the primary middle passive will never look like this. There are similarities, like there is no overlap from the primary to the secondary. And then if you were to translate something in the passive, you would still include that I, so elumain or eluomain, I was, so we'll still introduce that to be verb. But now we're going to introduce another to be verb, but it's going to be the participle form. I was being. Being is the participle of the to be verb. I was being loosed. So in this case here, we have three verbs, two of which are to be verbs. Was is past tense. Being is kind of the state of the to be verb. Loosed. So we have three verbs. I'll count them off for you here. 1, 2, 3. The being here is our passive verb.
Would that be where the imperfect comes into play?
This is the imperfect passive. I was being loosed by the fox.
Since we don't know when it really ends, it just...
Right. It has that continuous aspect here. So in this sentence, the fox is actually our subject, as we learned in the middle passive, because the fox is the one receiving the action of the verb, whereas I am not. In English, we're going to have this as I, even though this is not the subject. It's a little confusing because we would normally say that I am the subject,
Right.
but this is, we would never say me is being loosed.
Right.
Or me was being loosed. That's just terrible grammar. But this is a passive sentence in what we're going to find here. So we'll also find the same thing in the word erikomai. So erikomai takes different tenses, right?
Right.
Or different roots in different tenses. So the key about the imperfect is that it takes the present tense stem. So we saw with luo, erikomai, we're going to write the root here, erk. So again, in the imperfect, we're going to have first off, we're going to have an augment, right?
Right.
These two are going to contract, and they're going to become an eta. So to be erk. Then we're going to have our connecting vowel omicron. And then we're going to have our middle passive here, erkomain. Because this is a deponent word. If it's a deponent in the present, it's going to be a deponent in the future, in the imperfect. So erkomain literally means I was coming. And this is the key to the deponent. It's going to be middle passive in form, but present in function. Or in this case, imperfect in function. I was coming. So a deponent is, you're just going to have two verbs in order to translate it. I was coming versus eluomein, I was being loosed. And still we do have that participle force, which adds that continuous force for us. And again, I just want to say that the imperfect is used heavily because it gives kind of some flavor to some narrative. We've been talking a little bit about principal parts. Anytime that you're looking at vocabulary, you'll notice that vocabulary in the imperfect is going to be in parentheses. It's because it does not have its own principal part. And it doesn't have its own principal part because it's taking the stem or the root in the present tense stem. And so it doesn't have its principal part because it's taking the present tense stem. And that's going to be the case with all imperfect or imperfects. I want to talk a little bit about compound words. Compound words are the words that we combine to with a preposition, kind of to change the force of a verb. We saw the word ekbalo. I'll break that out for you here shortly. So we have ek, the preposition from or out of. I'll just put from / out of. With balo, meaning I throw out or I cast out, kind of a strong sense. The advantage to a compound word, actually make it so it's more one word. The advantage to this is that it intensifies your verb. I throw out or I cast out. Very strong connotation. And you'll find that kind of to be the case with really any preposition combining with a verb. It just intensifies the force of the verb. So the augment in this case, because ekbalo is going to be in different tenses, specifically past tenses, we're not going to put the augment at the beginning of the word because the preposition is not part of the verb. So it doesn't go there. But it does go actually right here. And because balo is one of those words that changes its root frequently in tenses, this actually needs to change. So this is the aorist tense. Ek ebelon is how this becomes, and this one really means rather than I cast off.
So that would become a C.
This one?
Or yeah.
No, it would not become a C because it would become a C if there's a sigma added here. There is no sigma. So I threw off, or I threw away. It would be in the past tense. Ek ebelon is what you would find here. So there's been some change to the root based on the tense. And we could do this all day. We could add prepositions to these, but the augment will never go before the preposition. It comes after the preposition and before the root of the verb. So that's why we have ek ebelon. I could do another one for you. Ek is our preposition. Luo is our verb. Here we're going to change the tense, so we're going to change it to the imperfect, and then we're just going to put the epsilon here just before the root of the word. Obviously, the omega goes away because it's not in the present tense. We have our connecting vowel omicron, and then we have our personal endings new. So this could literally mean either they were destroyed, or they were destroying, or they were loosing, or I was loosing, or I was loosing out, or I was destroying out. This is actually, I believe, a word I made up, ekluo, but you could kind of play around with kind of some of the verbs and attach prepositions to them to intensify the form of the verb. And then when you're parsing these verbs, just like what we've seen, so if we were to see the word, ergometha, if we were to see this form of the word, we would parse it imperfect, deponent, because it's middle passive in form, but active in function, yes. So deponent, and then the mood, which is going to be indicative, and then the person is going to be first person, plural, from, so that the lexical form, what we've talked about before, the lexical form of a word will always be the present active indicative form of that word. So it's going to be ergomai, and it's going to mean we were coming. It's going to be the inflected meaning. Based on all of those categories, the inflected meaning is going to be we were coming. And that's how you're going to be parsing imperfect verbs. One last thing that I'm going to talk about. We've been slowly adding to our knowledge of the master verb chart, and today's no exception. So if the tense, we're just going to write tense as we always have, augment, tense stem, tense formative, connecting vowel, and then personal ending. I'm just going to cut out the first singular paradigm. You should be able to know that by now, kind of what the paradigms are going to be based especially on nouns. So if our tense is going to be present active, we'll just make that very clear. Present active, any augment?
No.
No, the tense stem is going to be present. Tense formative is blank. Connecting vowel is going to be omicron epsilon. And then the personal ending is going to be primary active. As we saw in that chart, falls into that first box. Then we're going to have present, middle passive, no augment, tense stem is present. So it takes the first principal part. I'll just write one here. No tense form. Connecting vowel still, Omicron epsilon, and then we're going to have the personal ending as primary, middle passive. So now what we've done recently is we've put the futures down here. So the imperfect, for whatever reason, is going to be next. So we're going to have imperfect, and then it'll be active. We'll just make that very clear. Imperfect active, augment, yes. It's going to have an epsilon as the augment. Present tense stem, because the imperfect takes the present tense stem, no tense formative. The connecting vowel, still Omicron epsilon, and then the personal ending, this is where it's going to change. The imperfect active is going to take the secondary active personal endings. Then we're going to move to the imperfect middle passive. There's going to be an augment, and again, what's the stem? What's the tense stem going to be? Present. Why is that? Because the imperfect takes the present tense stem. So the personal ending here, this is going to be the secondary middle passive. It's the imperfect middle passive is going to take the secondary middle passive personal endings. Mm-hmm. Now we can jump to the future. So we're going to go future active, any augment.
No.
And then this is the tense stem is going to be future active. Tense formative, we're going to have sigma, which attaches itself to the stem and or the root, changes that. Again, we still have Omicron epsilon, and then we're going to take primary active. Next one down is going to be the liquid active. No augment because it's not past tense. Future active. S is going to be our tense formative. And then connecting vowel is going to be Omicron epsilon. And this is going to be the primary active personal endings. So we can start to see kind of how this pattern is going. Next, we're going to have the future middle. You can see just how quickly this fills up. Future middle, tense form is future active, sigma, Omicron epsilon, and then because it's middle passive, it's going to take primary middle passive. Whew. And then liquid future middle, last one. At least that we've learned. Liquid future middle, because it doesn't, this is the future middle and the liquid future middle because the future passive has its own form. We have not learned that because that is the sixth principal part. This one, actually, present tense stem is going to be future active as well. Right. Future active, and then it's going to have S as the tense formative, Omicron epsilon, and then primary middle passive. So just real quickly, we can just kind of see some things moving here. So far we've learned two principal parts. We've learned the present tense stem, which is a principal part, and then the future active, which is the second principal part. But this is the master verb chart. We have the aorist to learn next week. We're going to add a little bit more. But again, I just want to stress that the master verb chart helps us kind of see at a 50,000-foot view what the tense is doing that we can kind of understand a little bit. Thank you.